many are still grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective Podcast, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm your host and president of Jigsaw Queensland, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating and not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Hi, it's Jo Sparrow here. I can hardly believe that we're already into our 6th season. It's incredible to look back at the 5 seasons we've already completed. The podcast has reached more than 40,000 listeners across 45 countries, and we've been getting such thoughtful feedback from our community. Listeners share how the podcast has helped them learn more about their own adoption, how specific episodes have deeply resonated with them, and how their own experiences have been enriched by the stories that we've shared. And this is all possible because of the courageous people who have shared their stories with us. And I want to thank them all for their vulnerability and generosity. I learn something new with each interview and truly enjoy meeting people from our community and hearing their perspectives and broadening the conversation. So I'm excited to dive into this new season, which promises to be another powerful one. Our first guest is getting things off to a fantastic start. Dr. Alison Ingram is an actor, theatre director, and a researcher of adult adoptees' lived experience. She recently completed her doctorate in theatre and performance at Monash University in Melbourne, focusing her research on a group of adult adoptees working as a performing ensemble, that is, actors telling their own stories. After more than a year of creative development, Alison's project faced a major challenge when the COVID-19 pandemic threatened to derail everything. But if there's one thing we know about adopted people, it's that they're resilient. The pandemic, while disruptive, ended up having an unexpectedly positive impact on the project. In 2022, the culmination of Alison's research premiered as Infans, VOIC'D, a history play in 5 acts at Monash University's Clayton campus, presented as both an audio play and a live theatre event. Today, Alison's here to talk about her motivations, the research behind the project, and the impact it's had, and what she's working on now. Welcome, Alison. It's such a pleasure to have you as our first guest for 2025.
Well, thank you so much, Jo. It's great to be here. I'm privileged to be speaking to you. Thank you.
Alison, I'd like to begin by hearing a little about your own story as an adopted person. Can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Well, mine is not a happy adoption story at all. I was born in Crown Street Women's Hospital in Sydney in 1961, and for those people who know a little bit about Crown Street, it was, what I call one of New South Wales' largest adoption agencies. So I was taken from my mother at birth, and from my research, I now understand that she was one of the women who were denied her human and legal rights, and I was placed with people who had already adopted a boy and were given the privilege of raising another woman's child. But my adopting home was a very dysfunctional environment. My mum had severe Tourette's syndrome. She was alcoholic and she was addicted to prescription drugs. So my home was what I describe as a place where everybody was walking on eggshells.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad, as much as I loved him and as much as he and I remained as close as we possibly could, he had a secret life. He was having an affair for approximately 10 years before he finally left her and divorced her and remarried. So when I look back, the word adoptive, the phrase adoptive parents and adoptive home is something I don't apply. And I think it's a generic term that's been produced by adoption itself, by the industry and by researchers and journalists and politicians and everybody adopting, if you like, the word adoptive parents and adoptive families. But to me, it's an adjective that describes the way that people behave. They behave and they perform adoptively. And so we know that many of us suffered abusive families, abusive adopting parents. So I'm eliminating the word adoptive from my vocabulary, and I will refer during our chat now to my adopting parents rather than my adoptive parents, because as much as Dad tried and as good as our relationship was, I wouldn't describe it as an adoptive home at all, but an abusive one, and an emotionally abusive one, not a physically or sexually abusive environment, but one, like, for example, I don't feel that I ever had a mother.
Yeah.
Because my mum was absent. So they both had their own lives and they both had their own issues while I was growing up. And it may be because of the environment. I was grieving. I now know I can look back and think I was grieving all the time. And I call it the sense of knowing that my mother, as a lot of us say, was out there and that she needed me to find her and that we needed to be together. So much so that I now describe it, since completing my research, as the presence of my mother's absence. So the presence of her absence is she's there, but she's not there. And it's as if she's dead, but she may not be dead. And does she think I'm dead? And all of that sort of thing. So I grew up very isolated. I was very embarrassed to bring people home. I never did, really. I spent a lot of time as a kid and as an adolescent with my best girlfriend from school. I stayed away from home as often as I could. And as I approached adulthood, I feel that my life became derailed because of the environment in which I grew up. I turned to drugs and alcohol myself. I searched for love in all the wrong places. I had a number of relationships as a very young woman that I knew were not right. I mean, I met lots of wonderful people too and had great boyfriends. But I think, like so many of us, when I got too close, or when they got too close to me, was when I suddenly turned, and I would turn on them. And that thing of, the whole word of abandonment, I don't like that word either, but I would run from relationships, including from my own marriage, to a very wonderful man. I think I just didn't know, and I still don't know, how to love and how to be in a loving relationship and feel secure in that. So yeah, my adoption experience has hijacked my life in a way, and it's taken me a long time to feel that I have found myself. It's taken a lot of research, a lot of personal research, and a lot of traveling and a lot of talking to other adoptees, because we learn that we're not alone. We learn that we are a community of people with very similar experiences. So yeah, it's been I still carry it and I can feel myself. It's almost like the grief is always just beneath the surface. In fact, that's a line from the play.
Yeah.
It's just beneath the surface all the time. And if I talk about it and something gets triggered, it's like a volcano.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sorry that was your experience, Alison. How do you think your experience with adoption has influenced your work as an actor and a theatre director? And have you noticed any direct connections?
My mother was a dancer, and when we were first in reunion, she told me a lot about my family history and our ancestors. So before we met, the only thing I knew was that my mother was a dancer and my father was a Greek, as my mum described her. So when it came to my training in the theatre, and I had always been interested in acting in high school, but before I left primary school, I did ballet for 1 year. And when I did the exam at the end of that year, I was surprised. I got honours. I was the top of the class, and I had no idea how or why I would be the kid in the ballet class who came top of the class. And my mum came to a demonstration of the dance for the exam. So like an end of year Christmas show that is so common in local dance and drama schools. And she was her embarrassing self. She sat in the back of the room ticking away. She wore a wig and dark glasses, and she had sinusitis at the time, so she was a real presence in the room. And I was so embarrassed that I didn't return to ballet. And about 4 or 5 years later, when I was clearly off the rails, she decided that she would tell me what she knew about my parents. And that was when she told me, your mother was a dancer. And now I reflect on that and I think, well, why didn't you tell me that after that ballet exam? Why didn't you decide then that it was time to encourage me? Mm-hmm. So all of those kind of arts activities that I engaged in, and I did a little bit of drama at school, were not supported by them. They didn't ever talk to me about it. So when I eventually found my way to Ensemble Studios Acting School in Sydney, which was run by American Hayes Gordon, who was an actor and a musical theatre person and a theatre director. When I found my way there, certainly the kind of grief that is embodied was very easy to tap into, because acting is an art of using your own lived experience. Mm-hmm. And your own emotions and relaying that through the words of a script while you're playing a character. You're still you can't escape that it's you that's embodying a character as such. So I did find and have found since that being adopted meant that I wasn't good at characterizing. I was good at Shakespeare, because Shakespeare doesn't require characterization. The words that you speak formulate the way that you perform, and the words are so powerful, they have an impact on your body and your mind as you speak them. So becoming an actor was, in a way, perhaps not the kind of theatre I would have gone into had I been raised by my mother. Mm-hmm. And now I keep saying too that if my mother had been successful in preventing my adoption, as she tried to do, I would have been raised by her village. All of her dance girlfriends, the writers, the actors, the painters, the authors that were her village would have provided me with the greatest arts education one could possibly hope to get. So when I met her, it was fortuitous that I was already an actor, and she was very pleased that I had trained to be an actor. but I see it now as my adoption hijacked the artist I should have been.
Now, I know that you used theatre and performance as a way to explore adoption in your research, which I find fascinating because I think arts and adoption a very good mix when it comes to finding healing and understanding our stories. So what motivated you to choose this medium for such a deeply personal and complex topic?
I knew that I wanted to go on to do an honours degree, which I did. And while I was writing up, I had interviewed 6 female adoptees. I was particularly interested in what other women's experience was in reunion. And while I was writing it up, I began to become concerned about my interpretation of what they'd said and whether they would be offended or whether they would approve of the way that I'd written up their experiences and interpreted their words. And I started to imagine something that a tutor at Griffith University had provided to a tutorial, which was focus groups that she worked with, where she would bring groups of people together to get a discussion happening as her data. And I started to imagine bringing those 6 women back together again and then having a discussion and talking to them about the way that I had written it up and making sure that it was doing justice to their feelings and their experiences. And so when I then moved to Victoria and I was looking then for a supervisor for my PhD, and I found a supervisor at Monash University who was interested in the topic of adoption, but she said, if I become your supervisor, you will have to do, I'm in the theatre and performance department, you will have to do a performance of some kind. And honestly, I had not ever twigged that there was an academic realm called theatre and performance. So as soon as she said that, I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll have the group together and create a piece. And my participants will be the performers. They will be the actors of their own stories. So the motivating factor was, it was circumstantial. It was all incremental. It was meeting a supervisor who said, this is a performance project you'd be doing. Me then as a theatre maker and an ensemble trained theatre maker, it was natural. It was quite a natural progression to, okay, I'm going to create a piece with a group of adoptees.
It's one of the things I loved about doing academic research was I have never felt more joyful or alive or stressed than when I was doing that, because you just keep getting bits of information and new directions fed into you, things you didn't know were there, and just keep getting taken down different avenues, and really just opens up your thinking and your mind. And I don't know, it's very exciting to create something new and to have all those avenues opened. So let's talk a bit about the research itself. What was the focus of your study, and what was your hypothesis that you were working with as you began?
Look, my hypothesis came directly from my experience of reunion with my mother. So I began by proposing that the adult who actively searches for their mother specifically isn't just motivated by their desire for knowledge of their self and to find identity, but I began by arguing that they're driven by a deep and enduring, unrequited love, a love that I argue was formed in utero, because we are receiving oxytocin from our mothers while we're in utero, and everything that she feels is the unborn fetus, the human being, absorbs. So, but performing the research, like doing the research, then developed that initial hypothesis further. And I proposed that the human infant who's separated from their mother for the explicit purpose of facilitating their adoption to strangers then endures a lifelong psychic injury, in being deprived of their mother's love and denied what other people can take for granted, and that is the development of continuity of the self with their mother and their kin, within their family culture, and with knowledge of their ancestral storylines.
It sounds, or read when I was reading through your thesis, like the project evolved quite a bit along the way, which is what happens with research degrees. What was the initial plan for the play, and how did it shift once I hate saying the word pandemic, I wish we could all forget it, but once the pandemic hit?
Well, as I said too, the pandemic turned out to be a blessing in disguise. So the original idea was, as I've said, I was going to create a theatre piece. I didn't know what would happen, but it was definitely going to be performed in a theatre space. And it would be for an invited audience. I mean, I did think for a while about inviting people that would be problematic, let's say, or stressful to have in that audience. But I knew that it was a theatre project. Well, then along came COVID. And on the 15th of March, 2020, we were rehearsing on our feet, what we call on our feet, which is getting up and moving, beginning to move, while we still have scripts in our hands. But this was the 4th draft of the play. And it was the 15th of March, and that was the last rehearsal that we had together.
Wow.
So we'd been, the process that I'd been in was, each draft of the play, we would have another workshop. I think we had 16 all-day workshops in total. So once I had created the first draft, based upon common events in all of our stories, so that all of the differences within the stories could be spoken in between. So each common event is an act of the play. And I don't think I explained either what the word infans means,
No.
but it's Latin. It's obviously infans is infant. So it's the Latin derivative, the Latin for infant. But if you look up the Latin infans, INFANS, it literally means one who cannot speak. So one who cannot speak, voiced, is basically the title. So the initial plan was to have a live performance. What was fortuitous then about the COVID pandemic was, by September that year, my supervisor began asking how was I going to complete my research. And she suggested, don't worry, Alison, you're going to get your doctorate. You can hand in the written play as the performance component of your study. And I thought, no.
Yeah.
I'm a theatre maker. This has to be performed in a theatre. But what it did then was it eliminated the problem of anonymity and my performers, my actors, being exposed on the stage. It eliminated the issue of memorizing memorizing your lines and remembering where you're going, which is easy enough for me to do, but not necessarily without intense stress and anxiety for untrained actors. So then what I did was I deconstructed the play into 7 monologues, because my story was also in it. I rehearsed with all of the participants on the phone. I considered recording the play as with us all together, but then my sound recordist and editor said, no, my recording equipment is so pristine that every time a page is turned, and you'll have 7 pages turning at once, it's just too much noise. So I rehearsed with everybody individually. And what I did was I inserted questions from the original interview into the written monologues, so that I would then be able to, while they were telling their story, as the monologue, I would be able to ask them questions. So they kept talking to me and kept it fresh. But then came the problem of, well, it still has to be performed in a theatre because it has to be witnessed in a theatre. So by it being only audio, without any names and completely anonymised, the only issue that we have now, or one compelling issue anyway, is that our voices are recognisable, but it has eliminated that problem of being out in public, of the worry of performing, and of perhaps, if it had been a live performance, rather than this very contained, I recorded in 2 hours, everybody went away, I took the recordings away and I cut it all up and I reconstructed the play line by line from everybody's separate recordings of their stories. It eliminated that performance anxiety, and it meant that their performance was done. My work had just begun. It took about 10 months to edit the play back together, and then the first time I sat down with all of them for them to hear the play, it was absolutely profound. They were so enthusiastic. They were just more gung-ho than ever to make sure it was performed in a theatre and that they could bring people to it for it to be witnessed. So that's why COVID, and now of course we have this document. We have a play that is publishable. It's like an audio book, and it could be, I haven't done it yet because I don't know, I haven't had time to really think about how I'm going to go about it, although I think about it all the time. So yeah, COVID just came along and made something. That's what theatre people, what artists were doing all over the world. They were finding ways to get around the fact that they could no longer be doing their work for live audiences.
Yeah.
I was just one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. It's difficult to get a full sense of what the play was like without actually hearing it. So Alison has kindly given us permission to share a small sample of the play for you to listen to now.
So there were all these things running through my head, and my mum saying, well, you're never going to know who she was, and my dad saying, you'd be opening up some skeletons, and the thought of her saying, look, please just go away.
I had this image for some reason in my mind that my mother was this small, petite, vulnerable brunette, dark-eyed waif. And so subconsciously, when I was attracted to someone, I think I was saying, oh, there she is. There she is.
We don't feel safe when we're planted in another place, and people just say, no, you're not allowed to know.
Not allowed to know. And I didn't know if it was rape. I mean, I don't know why. And you know what? There are so many possibilities. The possibilities, they're endless.
But somehow I felt like she was out there, waiting for me.
This person out there.
I had this sense of her all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
Like, because I existed, she must as well. And that she needed to know where I was. And that I was alive. I didn't know how I would find her, but I don't think it ever entered my mind that she might reject me.
I was afraid of rejection.
It just never entered my mind.
Because I didn't know the circumstances.
It was like I felt
I didn't
her
know
presence.
why
But there was
she
something
gave me
missing.
away.
I wonder where they are. A hole.
And I
it
knew
was
very
chunky over their
secret,
life.
a family
Felt like
secret.
she
She
was
was out there waiting for me.
You're not allowed
But
to
there
know.
was something missing.
You're not allowed to know.
But
to
I
know.
have that within which passeth show.
Hush, hush.
I can only imagine how incredible that would have been to listen to live with the incredible set that Alison had created, which was quite haunting. Thanks for sharing it, Alison. One of the things that really stood out to me when I was reading your thesis was how the project created such an amazing opportunity for peer support amongst adoptees. Like, that was the thing I was getting. I'm going, this is peer support. And I'm thinking, as when you're reading a thesis, it's usually sort of in a chronological order in some ways. And so I was waiting for when you twigged to that as well. And it seemed like the arts were a way for them to really find and use their voices and support each other. So was this a discovery for you, and as much of an evolution for you as a researcher as it was for the participants? Because it seems like when they sat down and listened to it for the first time, they might have started to realise too that they'd been in a peer support environment.
Yeah, it's something, it's not that we didn't use those words. We didn't say it was peer support. But every full day workshop began with an allocated 20 to 30 minutes to catch up with one another, because I had, I separated the workshops, they were once a month for 12 months to begin with. And that 20 minutes or half an hour by the last workshop turned into 3.5 hours. So it was peer support, though I didn't know that term or think about it in those terms at the time, because of course I was thinking, how am I going to get onto the exercises and the reading that we have to do today, when it was so evident that there were several people in the group that really needed to talk.
Yeah.
And that they had been led to, they were feeling, not just for the first time, but what happens with a group of people who work together as actors and do a show together is that there's a kind of family there. So we became, well, I became close to them. I can't speak for them. I don't know if they feel close to each other, but I have to say that after the second performance, and it's so common in the theatre that especially as students, you finish a play and everybody's elated and everyone's hugging each other backstage, provided you've all stayed friends, of course. But I was really surprised that as soon as it was finished, I turned and it was in the dark, just off stage, and they were all in a hug. They were all hugging one another. And I was standing back like I was the director who was not in the group. But I was so chuffed to see them do that. So yes, it had a profound effect on me, but I didn't discover that until after it was over. And I didn't discover it until now, really, that how important it is that we are given a voice and that we're able to speak freely, which I think is the biggest thing about it too. Whenever we speak to people outside of our community, we're constrained and we're interrupted by their ideas about what adoption is and the adoptees that they know who don't feel like you do. So we speak freely and we get an opportunity to speak and to not be interrupted by that dominant voice because people haven't heard it before, they don't understand what it is that we're talking about.
Yeah. I've said before on the podcast and in different places in my life that I feel adoption in the throat. That's where it just gets stuck there, like my voice and my thoughts, and there's not many safe places where I can express myself about it or even find the words to come out. And so when it does, it often doesn't come out how I want, or it's not what I want to say. Yeah.
I think it's another hijacking. It's like you try to speak, and for me, I couldn't say the word adopted until after I'd met my mother. And my mother and I knew and were in contact with each other for 18 years before she died. But I couldn't say the words "I'm adopted" without my throat just closing up and the grief just pouring. So speech then becomes impossible with other people. And so to me, it's no wonder that people are surprised by our experience and what we think and feel and what we speak about, because they've never heard it before, because the silence and the secrecy of closed legislation and the whole suppression of what was really happening behind closed doors, that thousands and thousands and thousands of women in Australia and millions across the world. And you know what? There's a quote I used from Jigsaw in my thesis, which is, how is it that at this one period in time, all these women, millions of women across the world, were just freely giving away, I hate that word too, giving away their babies? It's just so evident.
And it didn't happen in any other period. Yeah, that was by Dr. Trevor Jordan.
No,
Yeah.
in any other period in time. So, I've forgotten the question again.
I think you've answered it, actually. And which just brings us to the night of the two performances. Can you share with us what those nights were like for the actors, the audience, and for you personally?
Okay, some of the actors, well, I think probably everybody was pretty nervous. For me, the lead up to it was quite normal. I designed the lighting myself.
It was an incredible set. I've seen photos of the set and I've listened to the play, and it was, it was moving or haunting in some ways, the way it was set up. Yeah.
Haunting being the philosophical, theoretical
Yeah.
of it as well, that we're haunted by knowing and not knowing. I felt comfortable. I was under a lot of stress, of course, because there was this unknown thing of I'm in this domain where I feel very comfortable and I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional. I'm doing this, but this is a play that I've created with a group of people. We knew, and I knew that in the editing process, I had worked with my editor to the point he didn't know what he was getting himself in for, really. It was refining and refining and refining and tightening it up and cutting things and overlaying things, as you would have heard when you listened to it. But
it's very well done.
I knew it was good. I knew that it was a good piece. I just didn't know how it would be heard. And so I did a very quick rehearsal. We were all on the stage while the recording was played in the David Lee Sound Gallery on Clayton, Monash Clayton's campus, and which is a beautiful space where everybody's each voice was coming out of a different channel a different speaker in the room. And so it was this odd thing of what is everybody experiencing, because backstage for me was a normal place to be, but I don't know how they felt backstage. It was all new to them and different. Afterwards, a few of them divulged that they were nervous because they had family and friends in the audience. A lot of Vanish members came to the productions as well, and members of Arms Victoria. So it was the Q&A afterwards that actually having the opportunity to discuss things with the audience, that was when I felt, okay, they did get it. And there were certainly some profound responses from the audience, including a woman who said, "You guys have ruined adoption for me. I thought it was a wonderful thing," and went on to relay her own story as to why she was saying that. And she wasn't adopted, but she had that feeling that, it was all fantastic, and she was completely blown away by what was revealed in the play.
After all of the research, did you prove your hypothesis? And what were the outcomes of your study? And was there anything about the experience that surprised you?
I searched for and recruited people who were of mature years, who had done a lot of work on themselves and a lot of personal research and therapy, perhaps, who were ready to tell their stories in public. That was really, really important, because I didn't want to re-traumatize people. I wanted people who would be able to handle and were really wanted to represent the community, let alone themselves, and to speak to their own family and friends about their experience, that they were aware of representing the community as well. Okay, so because my hypothesis was we're suffering from the loss of love and the death, the as if death of our mother and our family and our connection to time and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about theatre and performance, and this theatre for social justice is what I'm calling it now, is very different to sociological studies, for example, where your concluding chapter is about the outcomes of the research. So I think in my closing chapter, I did outline, by allowing the actors' feedback just to speak for themselves, and also keeping, because I after the Q&A sessions, I asked people, I put my email address into the theatre program, and I announced in the Q&A session that if anybody was interested in participating in a survey afterwards, to email me, and I would send them the documents and they could send back their written feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a number of people in the audience were work colleagues of one of the actors, working in the mental health and drug and alcohol rehabilitation field. And they provided the most profound feedback. They said things like, everybody in mental health and psychology needs to hear this play, because so many of their clients are adoptees and people don't understand the trauma. So yeah, I was surprised and quite blown away because I was nervous about whether people would hear it and whether people would understand. But as for proving the hypothesis, until the play is taken out into the world, till I have a chance to do it again for an unsolicited audience, let's say, for people who just choose, oh, that sounds interesting, well, let's go to that. And I hope to do that, and I hope to have Q&A sessions with those audiences as well, because that's vital.
Mm-hmm.
I can't conclude that I have proven my hypothesis.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Like any kind of output that we put out about adoption, often we're just talking to ourselves, to other adopted people or mothers or fathers who've lost children to adoption, and sometimes it's like an echo chamber. And there are many of us who benefit from hearing that for multitudes of reasons. But it's getting the people who aren't directly impacted to listen and perhaps change that narrative, change the language around adoption, change, this idea of what adoption is. That's so important and so difficult to engage them. It's all been so interesting, Alison. And I know you're working on new projects at the moment with Vanish and Arms in Victoria, which I understand is still in the very early stages. Would you be able to share anything with us about that work and what you're envisioning for it?
Along with Vanish, the new CEO of Vanish, Dr. Michelle Blanchard, we have received a small grant from Relationships Australia Victoria through the Forced Adoption Support Services Program, which is supported by the federal government, to undertake or to extend upon what I've done already, and to work with, for the Vanish project, to work with a group of adoptees online to do storytelling workshops. So I'm going to apply the method that I created through my PhD to helping people who may want to write this story, or might, I hope, just want to be helped to tell their story.
Yeah.
Particularly to their friends and family whom they may not have ever told their story before, and to create a way of telling that story that will empower them to do it. I'm about to begin constructing or, working on the development of what those online workshops will be, because that will be a very different environment to try to do that.
Yes.
It won't be the option for in-person workshops, but later in the year, the grant will extend to doing in-person workshops in Melbourne, with perhaps some of those people who might come to the online workshops too, and to work in a similar way to create another performance text. This time, though, because there are these common events, there are also common events that aren't applicable to the first play. What happens when you can't meet your mother?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if you find that she is deceased?
Yeah.
What if she's kept it a secret her whole life and has struggled her whole life to keep it at bay and hasn't told her subsequent children and hasn't talked about it in 40, 50 years, and she just can't do it?
Yeah.
What is the story then, and how do people cope with that? So I think I've told the story of the reunion story. And I'm interested to see if this arts practice can help people who haven't had that opportunity too. But
Yeah.
I'm also open to, other narrative arcs. The arc of the story is we begin the internal searching, we are actively searching, we have the reunion, and then we're faced with the reality of post-reunion. But what happens if that's can't happen? So the objective of the year-long project that this will be is to draft a new script, and before the end of December this year, to have a rehearsed reading of that script. So we would again invite Vanish members, family members, and just have people sit and read it, because contingent upon whether I go ahead and do another audio drama with that script, or perhaps bring actors in if people don't want to do that and don't want to be recognised. But I do think the audio drama is the safest way of people retaining their anonymity and not being recognisable to people who perhaps are a bit sensitive about how it is, the law.
Yeah. Alison, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your research and the powerful impact of your work with us today. It's been such a pleasure to read and hear about how theatre, performance and the exploration of adoptees' voices might create meaningful change. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much, Jo. Have a good day.
For anyone tuning in, remember that every adoption experience is unique, and it's never too late to begin your own journey of exploration. And if you're looking for more resources, support, or simply a space to share, Jigsaw Queensland is here to help. If you'd like to support the podcast, leave us a review, share the podcast, or let us know what you think by emailing or calling us. We love to hear from you. And meanwhile, if you have a story that you'd like to share with us and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, jump onto the main podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And just note that Adopt Perspective can be and is listened to by people all over the world. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com. and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number, and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you're calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.